Ashes of the Soul-Forged, Chapter 6. The Crucible. As observed by me, Valis of the quiet accord, there are places in this world where divinity fears to tread, not because they are profane, though some are, but because they are honest. Korthak's throne was such a place. Built during the first war between my kind and the Varkhûl, it had been a fortress of terrible purpose, constructed by mortal hands to serve as a prison for things that belonged to neither side. When the war ended in exhausted stalemate rather than victory, the fortress was abandoned. The prisoners remained. I tell you this because what happened there changed everything. Not just for Edrin, though he was transformed. Not just for Marcus or Mira, though their paths bent sharply in that crucible, but for me, for the Accord, for the ancient machinery of cosmic balance that had ground forward, inexorable and unquestioning, since before mortal memory, the third way. That's what Kylum had called it when he took Bran's hammer to reforge. I had dismissed it as the cryptic musings of an ancient smith who'd lived too long and seen too much. But Kylum never spoke without purpose, and his words had lodged themselves in Edrin's mind like splinters, small, persistent, impossible to ignore. The journey to Korthak's throne had taken 3 days. 3 days of Marcus teaching Edrin to partition the screaming voices in his skull. 3 days of Mira watching both men with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what failure would cost. 3 days of me following unseen, bound by the Accord's restrictions, but unable to look away. I should have intervened sooner. I should have guided them away from that place, but I was still clinging to the fiction that I was merely an observer, that the rules of the quiet accord bound me more tightly than my own growing conviction that everything we had built, all the careful structures of divine law, was predicated on a lie. The fortress appeared on the third afternoon like a broken tooth jutting from the earth. The thornwood forest had given way to barren hills, and there it stood, angular, defiant, built from stones that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No banners flew from its towers, no smoke rose from its chimneys. It simply existed, patient and implacable, waiting for the next fool to seek what it offered. Edrin stopped at the crest of the final hill, his hand resting on the pommel of sorrow's edge. The blade had been unusually quiet during the journey, its red gem pulsing with a slow, almost contemplative rhythm. I couldn't tell if it was scheming or simply conserving strength for whatever lay ahead. "It looks smaller than I expected," he said. Marcus limped up beside him, one hand pressed to his ribs where the Inquisitor's poison still troubled him despite Mira's remedies. The important places usually do, and it's what's inside that matters. "Things that chose no side," Mira said quietly, joining them. Her eyes were fixed on the fortress with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, yes, but also recognition. "Do you know what that means, Edrin? In the First War, there were those who refused to serve either the Aurelion or the Varkhûl. Mortals who saw the conflict for what it truly was, not a battle between good and evil, but a philosophical war about control. Those who refused were problematic. So we imprisoned them," Edrin said flatly. 21 voices whispered their agreement in his skull, each one carrying the memory of some past betrayal, some authority's cruelty disguised as necessity. I could see him wrestling with them, using Marcus's techniques to keep them from overwhelming his thoughts. "The Aurelion did," Mira corrected gently, "with Varkhûl cooperation. It was one of the few things both sides agreed on. Independence threatens those who seek control. She didn't look at me, but I felt the accusation nonetheless. She knew I was there, had known since the first day she'd joined Edrin. The crown-shaped scar on her soul marked her as clearly to me as it did to any other divine-touched entity. She'd been one of ours once, a truth-seeker tasked with rooting out corruption. What she'd found instead had driven her to flee, and every word she spoke now was a quiet indictment of everything the Accord represented. "Are they dangerous?" Edrin asked. "The things inside?" "To those seeking easy answers, yes," Marcus said. "To those willing to question everything they've been taught." He shrugged, wincing at the movement. "That depends on how honest you can be with yourself." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of old stone and older sorrows. I watched Edrin's hand tighten on his sword as the voices within him surged, each one offering their own opinion, their own fear, their own bitter wisdom. But he didn't draw the blade. Instead he took a breath and used the technique Marcus had taught him, not fighting the voices, but giving them a question to argue over. What would my father do? The voices fractured immediately into debate. Brand had been a man of simple faith in the value of honest work, but 21 souls each had different interpretations of what that meant. Some argued for caution, others for boldness. A few suggested running. One, predictably, advocated for violence as the answer to all uncertainties. But beneath their cacophony, I heard something else. A quieter voice, one that carried the distinct timbre of Edrin Branson himself. Unsullied by the souls he'd absorbed, it said simply, he would move forward, one step at a time, until he understood what he was dealing with. "Let's go," Edrin said, and started down the hill. The approach was eerily silent. No bird sang in the skeletal trees that surrounded the fortress. No insects buzzed in the dry grass. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before touching those dark stones. The main gate stood open, had always stood open, I knew, since the day it was abandoned. There were no doors left to bar entry, no guards to challenge visitors. Korthak's throne didn't keep people out. It simply waited to see what they would become once inside. As they crossed the threshold, sorrow's edge began to hum, not the eager, hungry sound it usually made when sensing potential victims, but something different, almost uncertain. The red gem flickered, its light dancing across the ancient stonework in patterns that seemed to carry meaning just beyond comprehension. "It doesn't like this place," Edrin murmured. "Neither do I," Marcus admitted. Grief's echo hung at his side, its sister blade similarly agitated. But that's probably a good sign. The courtyard beyond was larger than it had appeared from outside. Space worked strangely here, bent by old magic and older purpose. Structures that should have been ruins stood intact, their windows dark and watching. At the courtyard's centre stood a well, its stones carved with symbols I recognised, protection wards, binding circles, containment glyphs, but they'd been modified, altered by hands other than those who'd originally placed them. The modifications didn't strengthen the magic, they freed it, redirected it, made it serve a different purpose entirely. "Welcome," a voice said from everywhere and nowhere. Edrin's hand went to his sword, but didn't draw it. Marcus shifted into a defensive stance despite his injuries. Mira simply closed her eyes, as if listening to something the others couldn't hear. "We seek shelter," Edrin said carefully, "and training. We mean no harm to those who dwell here." Silence. Then gradually, figures began to emerge from the shadows, not stepping forward exactly, more like they'd always been there and only now chose to be seen. There were perhaps a dozen of them, each one unique in their strangeness. A woman whose skin seemed to shift between flesh and stone with each breath. A man with eyes that held too many colours, as if he'd seen things that couldn't be translated into normal sight. A child who looked no older than 10 but carried the weight of centuries in their posture. Others, harder to categorise, harder to look at directly without feeling the mind sliding away from what it couldn't quite process. Training, the stone-skinned woman said, tasting the word. In what exactly? Edrin hesitated. The 21 voices clamoured with suggestions, warnings, strategies. But again, that quieter voice cut through, his own voice, speaking his own truth. How to be myself, he said, while carrying the souls of 21 others. How to honour what they were without becoming them. How to... He struggled for words. How to be many without losing one. The figures exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. The ancient child smiled, a strange, sad expression on such young features. Ah, they said, you've come to learn the thing that got us imprisoned, how to be free while being bound, how to serve neither master while honouring both truths. The third way, Mira breathed. There is no third way, the man with impossible eyes said sharply. That's the lie the Aurelion and Varkhûl both tell. That there are only two choices, two paths, two possibilities. The truth is simpler and more terrible. There are as many ways as there are souls to walk them. But walking your own way, he smiled without humour, that's the hardest thing in any world. Will you teach us? Edrin asked. The stone-skinned woman studied him for a long moment. That depends. Are you seeking comfort or truth? Because we cannot offer both. The path you're asking about requires giving up every certainty you've ever had. Every easy answer. Every divine promise and demonic bargain. It means standing alone in the space between, with nothing but your own judgment to guide you. She gestured to the modified wards around the well. This is what we learned. The bindings placed on us weren't just to keep us imprisoned. They were to keep us from teaching others what we'd discovered, that the cosmic order isn't inevitable, that the war between Aurelion and Varkhûl isn't the only narrative, that mortals, that anyone, can choose to step outside the story they've been given and write their own. 21 voices screamed in Edrin's head, some in terror at the blasphemy, some in rage at the audacity, some in desperate hope that such a thing might actually be possible. I felt my own certainties trembling. The accord had been built on the assumption that order required hierarchy, that freedom without structure led to chaos, that someone had to be in control or everything would collapse. But what if we were wrong? I don't seek comfort, Edrin said quietly. I seek what my father would have wanted. To make something rather than destroy it. To preserve what's worth preserving without being controlled by those who claim to know better. To be, his voice caught, to be good. Not because some god or devil tells me what good means, but because I've chosen it. Understanding the full cost. The ancient child laughed, a sound like breaking glass and spring rain. Oh, you're perfect, absolutely perfect. Come then, all of you. They turned to include Marcus and Mira in their gaze. We'll teach you what we know, but understand this. What you learn here can't be unlearned. Once you see the chains, you'll never be able to pretend they don't exist. Once you understand how much of the cosmic order is simply habit and fear dressed up as divine law, you'll never be able to bow to it again. We're already there, Marcus said, grimly touching the hilt of his own cursed blade. None of us can go back to who we were." "Good," the stone-skinned woman said. "Then let's begin. First." The training began immediately, though not in any way I expected. The inhabitants of Korthak's throne, they called themselves the Unbound, with no small irony given their imprisonment, didn't believe in gentle introductions or gradual escalation. They took Edrin to the modified well and told him to sit beside it. They instructed Marcus to rest his wounded body and simply watch. They pulled Mira aside and spoke to her in voices too quiet for me to hear, though I saw her face go pale at whatever they said. "The souls you carry," the stone-skinned woman, her name was Ch6, I would learn, said to Edrin, "You've been trying to manage them, to organize them, to make them serve you." "Marcus taught me to give them questions to argue over," Edrin said, "to partition them, to distract them," Ch6 interrupted, "to manipulate them into being quieter, to use them as tools." She shook her head. "That's still trying to control them, and control is the language of gods and demons, not free souls." "What else am I supposed to do?" Edrin's frustration bled into his voice. "They're screaming, constantly. Oh, if I don't manage them somehow, they'll tear me apart." "Perhaps," the ancient child said, settling beside him with the ease of someone who'd sat by that well for centuries. "Or perhaps they're screaming because you're treating them like prisoners, like threats, like things to be contained rather than people to be understood." "They're not people anymore," Edrin protested. "They're fragments, memories, echoes of who they once were, trapped in you," Ch6 finished. "Yes, and how do you think that makes them feel? To be imprisoned in the body of the person who killed them? To have no agency, no voice, no choice in anything that happens? To be used as tools by the very person responsible for their death?" The 21 voices fell suddenly, shockingly silent. Edrin stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. I could see the realization dawning. Terrible, obvious, and somehow never fully grasped, despite everything he'd experienced. He'd been so focused on managing his burden, on surviving their weight, that he'd never stopped to consider their perspective, to truly understand that these weren't just obstacles to his peace of mind. They were people. Dead people, fragmented people, people who'd had no choice in what had happened to them after they died. "Oh gods," he whispered. I've been treating them exactly like Nethrix does, like resources, like tools to be managed and controlled." "Now you begin to understand," the man with impossible eyes said. His name, I would learn, was Theron, and he'd been a philosopher before his refusal to serve either side had earned him imprisonment. The difference between using power and honouring it, between control and collaboration, between slavery and freedom. "But I didn't choose this," Edrin said desperately. "I didn't ask for them to be bound to me. Nethrix did this. The sword does this. I'm just trying to survive." "And they're just trying to survive too," the ancient child said gently. Their name was Vel, and their eyes held a kindness that made the truth they spoke somehow bearable. "They're dead, yes. Fragmented, yes. But they're not gone, not entirely. And as long as they exist within you, they deserve to be treated with dignity, with respect, with the understanding that they are not your property, but your—" They paused, searching for the right word. "Your community." "How?" The word came out broken. How do I treat murdered souls with dignity? How do I respect people who hate me for killing them? "By acknowledging their right to hate you," Ch6 said simply, "by understanding that their rage is justified, by giving them actual voice, not just the illusion of debate, by asking them not what you want to know, but what they need to say. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and where she touched, her stone skin texture seemed to transfer, just for a moment, to his flesh. You want to know the real secret of the third way? It's not a technique, it's not a trick or a meditation practice, it's simply this: treating every soul, including your own, as equally worthy of existence, not more important because they're louder or stronger or more useful, just equal, all deserving of being heard. That sounds impossible, Marcus said from where he sat watching. 21 voices, all equal, all demanding to be heard? He'd never make a decision, never move forward. Democracy is messy, Theron agreed with a wry smile. That's why tyrants prefer autocracy. But messy doesn't mean impossible. It just means difficult and slow, and requiring constant negotiation, which is exactly why the gods and demons both prefer to rule rather than collaborate. Edrin closed his eyes. I could see him struggling with the concept, trying to understand how to implement something so fundamentally different from everything he'd been taught. The 21 voices stirred again, but differently now. Less like a mob demanding attention, more like individuals waiting to see if they would truly be heard. What if I try and fail? He asked quietly. What if giving them equal voice just makes things worse? Then you'll have failed honestly, Vel said, and honesty is the only foundation worth building on. But I don't think you'll fail, Edrin Branson, because you've already done the hardest part. What's that? You asked, they said simply. You came here seeking not how to control, but how to coexist. That question itself is revolutionary. Most never think to ask it. Kes gestured to the well. This is where we learned our truth. These binding circles, these containment glyphs, we didn't break them. We modified them, turned them from tools of imprisonment into tools of communion. The magic that once held us separate now helps us stay connected while remaining distinct. It's the physical embodiment of what you need to do internally. Separate but connected, Edrin murmured, looking at the altered wards. Distinct but united. Precisely. Theron knelt beside the well, tracing one of the modified symbols with his finger. The Aurelian want unity through submission, all souls flowing into one cosmic order. The Varkhûl want freedom through consumption, the strongest souls devouring the weakest. Both approaches destroy what makes each soul unique. Both treat individuality as a problem to be solved, rather than a treasure to be preserved. But you found another way, Mira said, speaking for the first time since they'd pulled her aside. Her voice carried a strange quality, not quite hope, but something harder. Determination, perhaps, or recognition of a path she'd already started walking without knowing its name. We found our way, Kes corrected. Each of us had to discover it for ourselves. That's the frustrating truth about the path between paths. There's no map, no formula. What works for one soul doesn't work for another. All we can do is show you the principles and let you figure out your own implementation. Then show me, Edrin said, please. Vel smiled that strange, ancient smile. Very well. But first, you need to do something difficult. You need to apologize. To who? To them, they said, gesturing to nothing, to everything. To the souls only Edrin could hear. To every single one of the 21 people whose deaths you carry. Not for killing them. Some of those deaths were necessary, however tragic. But for how you've treated them since, for seeing them as a burden rather than as beings, for trying to manage them rather than understand them, for denying them the dignity of being truly heard. I watched Edrin's face work through a dozen emotions: resistance, shame, anger, grief. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Out loud, Kess added, so your companions can hear. So you can hear yourself. Words have power, especially words of acknowledgement and repair. Edrin took a shaking breath. His hand found the pommel of sorrow's edge, and for once the blade offered no commentary, no pressure, no hunger. Even it seemed to be waiting to see what would happen next. Rawn, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Oren Kull, Tarek Voss, Halvan Mar, the 3 bandits whose names I never learned. The 3 soldiers from the village, the harvesters, the dreamwalker, the commander, the hollow soldiers. All of you. He had to stop, had to swallow against the thickness in his throat. Marcus was watching him with an expression of profound understanding. Mira's eyes were wet. I'm sorry, Edrin said. Not for your deaths. Some of you earned what you got, and others were already dead before I found you. But I'm sorry for how I've treated your souls since, for seeing you as obstacles instead of people, for trying to control you instead of listening to you, for using Marcus's techniques to manipulate you into being quiet rather than actually addressing why you're screaming. Tears were running down his face now, and he made no attempt to wipe them away. You didn't choose this any more than I did. You didn't ask to be trapped in me, bound to this cursed blade, forced to watch everything I do with no power to stop it. You're victims too. And I haven't treated you like you are. I've been so focused on my own suffering that I forgot your suffering too. He paused, listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to give you real freedom when we're all trapped in this situation together. But I want to try. I want to stop treating you like you're mine to command and start treating you like you're people. People who deserve to be heard and respected and given actual voice in what happens. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I held my breath, wondering what would happen, whether this moment of vulnerability would change anything or simply expose Edrin to further pain. Then slowly, I felt something shift in the air around him. Not a visible change, but something deeper, more fundamental, as if reality itself was adjusting to accommodate a new truth. Edrin's eyes went wide. They're not screaming anymore, he whispered. No, Vel said softly. They're listening, waiting to see if you meant what you said, waiting to find out if this is real. What do I do now? Edrin asked, sounding lost. Now, Kess said, you prove it. You show them that you meant every word. And the only way to do that is through action, through living differently than you have been. She stood, gesturing for Edrin to do the same. Come, the real training begins now. We're going to teach you how to hear them, really hear them. Not as a cacophony to be managed, but as individual voices, each deserving their own attention. It will be exhausting. It will be painful. It will force you to confront truths about yourself you'd rather avoid. But if you succeed— If he succeeds, Marcus prompted. If he succeeds, Theron said, he'll become something that terrifies both the Aurelian and the Varkhûl equally. He'll become genuinely free. And nothing threatens those who seek control more than someone who refuses to be controlled. 2. The training that followed was unlike anything I had witnessed in my millennia of existence. I had seen warriors master impossible techniques through discipline and repetition. I had watched scholars unlock cosmic secrets through study and meditation. I had observed monks achieve enlightenment through decades of contemplation. But what the Unbound taught Edrin wasn't any of those things. It was simpler and infinitely harder. They taught him to listen. Not the performative listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak, not the strategic listening of someone seeking advantage, but genuine, open attention given freely to another being without agenda or expectation. For a soul weapon bearer carrying 21 murdered souls, this was agony. Start with one. Kes instructed on the second morning. They'd given Edrin the first night to process his apology, to sit with the strange silence that had followed it. Now the real work began. Choose someone, not the loudest or the quietest, not the most useful or the most troublesome, just someone who deserves to be heard. Edrin sat cross-legged by the modified well, his hands resting on his knees. Sorrow's edge lay across his lap, unusually passive. The blade seemed uncertain about this new approach, unable to manipulate what it didn't understand. Halvenmar, Edrin said after a long pause. The fourth soldier, the one who tried to stop the others. Why him? Theron asked. Because he was afraid, Edrin said quietly. I could feel it when I absorbed him. He didn't want to be there, didn't want to hurt my family. But he was too scared to stand up to Rawn and the others. And I killed him anyway. Because in that moment, I couldn't tell the difference between the one who hesitated and the ones who laughed. Good, Vel said softly. You've chosen someone you have unfinished business with, someone whose story you need to understand. Now ask him to speak, not to answer your questions, just to speak, to tell you whatever he needs you to know. I watched Edrin close his eyes, his breathing slowed, his fingers twitched slightly, as if reaching for something invisible, and then he began to cry. Not the violent sobbing of fresh grief, but the quiet, steady tears of someone finally understanding a truth they'd been avoiding. He sat like that for nearly an hour, tears running down his face, occasionally nodding or shaking his head in response to words only he could hear. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked exhausted, hollowed out, but also somehow more present than I'd ever seen him. He was 17, Edrin whispered. He'd joined the army to escape a father who beat him. Thought military discipline would be better than home. But Rawn was just another bully with more authority. He wanted to desert but had nowhere to go, no money, no skills except what they'd taught him. He was trapped. Edrin's hands were shaking. That night at my family's forge, he tried to talk the others out of it, suggested they just take some food and leave. But Rawn hit him, called him a coward, said if he didn't participate, he'd be reported for insubordination. So he stood there, watched, didn't raise a hand to help, but didn't actively hurt anyone either. Just froze, paralyzed by fear and shame and self-hatred. And then I killed him, Edrin continued, voice breaking. Put a sword through his chest while he was trying to run away. He wasn't running to report us or get reinforcements. He was just running, finally trying to escape. And I killed him for it. Does he hate you? Kes asked gently. Edrin was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. He understands why I did it. He'd have done the same in my position. What he hates is being ignored, being lumped in with the others, being treated like just another voice in the chaos when his whole life was about being invisible, being overlooked, not mattering enough for anyone to see who he actually was. And now? Theron prompted. Now that you've listened? Now he's quiet, Edrin said, wonder creeping into his voice. Not gone. I can still feel him there. But he's not screaming anymore. He's just present, waiting to see what I'll do with what he's told me. "One down," Vel said. 20 to go. It took 3 days. 3 days of Edrin sitting by that well, giving each soul his complete attention, learning their stories, understanding their fears, their regrets, their rage. Some sessions lasted hours. Others were mercifully brief, not because the soul had less to say, but because understanding came quickly once genuine attention was given. Raunt, the brutal leader, had been beaten by his commanding officers until cruelty became his only language. Varkhûl had been a good man once, broken by watching his family starve during a harsh winter while nobles hoarded grain. Tarek Vos had simply enjoyed violence. Some souls, Edrin learned, were genuinely twisted, and acknowledging that truth was part of honouring them too. The 3 bandits had been desperate refugees from a village destroyed in the war. The 3 soldiers from the second village had been conscripts who'd never wanted to fight at all. The harvesters were fragments of something older and stranger. Collected essences that had never been fully human but had developed crude sentience through proximity to the Well of Souls. The Dream Walker had been a scholar once, studying the nature of consciousness before Netherix had offered power in exchange for service. The hollow soldiers were exactly what they appeared to be, empty shells animated by will alone. And their emptiness itself was a kind of truth Edrin needed to acknowledge. And the commander. The ancient harvester commander carried memories stretching back to the First War, to battles between Aurelion and Varkhûl that had reshaped continents. That one took the longest, not because the commander was hostile, but because the weight of centuries of experience couldn't be processed quickly. Marcus watched this process with increasing intensity. I could see him wrestling with something, his own 43 sorrows pressing against the inside of his skull. The Unbound had been working with him separately, teaching him similar techniques, but adapted for his unique burden. Where Edrin carried the souls of the dead, Marcus carried the grief of the living, the accumulated sorrow of every person whose loved one he'd been forced to kill. "It's different for me," he said on the 3rd evening when Edrin had finally finished the last conversation. They sat together by a fire in one of the fortress's intact chambers, Mira preparing a simple meal nearby. "Your souls knew you killed them, my sorrows. They don't know I exist. They're just echoes of pain, pure emotion without the person attached." "That sounds harder," Edrin said quietly. He looked transformed by the 3 days of listening, thinner, older, but also more grounded, as if he'd finally found solid footing after months of drowning. "It is, and it isn't." Marcus poked at the fire with a stick. "Your souls can choose to forgive you, to work with you. My sorrows can't choose anything. They just arf. Permanent weather in my head. Rain that never stops." "But you're different than when we arrived," Mira observed. She'd been quiet these past days, spending much of her time in private conversation with the Unbound. Whatever they discussed left her looking troubled, but also strangely peaceful. "The weight isn't pressing you down the same way." Marcus nodded slowly. "Kes taught me something. She said I've been trying to carry all 43 sorrows simultaneously, trying to feel every grief at once, all the time. But no human can do that. Even someone carrying borrowed pain can't sustain that level of emotion indefinitely." "So what did you do?" Edrin asked. "I stopped trying." He laughed bitterly. "Sounds simple when I say it like that, but I've been treating my inability to feel all of them at once as a moral failure. Like if I'm not constantly drowning in their sorrow, I'm betraying them somehow. Kes pointed out that's just another form of ego, thinking I'm important enough to carry the entire weight of their grief alone." So now? Now I let them take turns. Marcus's expression was complicated, part relief, part guilt, part cautious hope. I acknowledge each sorrow when it surfaces, feel it fully, honour it, then let it recede so another can come forward. It's not about managing them or suppressing them, it's about accepting that I'm finite and that's not a failing. Does it work? Edrin asked. I can breathe, Marcus said simply. For the first time in years, I can take a full breath without feeling like I'm suffocating in other people's pain. That's not nothing. They sat in companionable silence for a while. Then Edrin turned to Mira, who'd been unusually quiet throughout the exchange. What have they been teaching you? He asked gently. You've been talking with the unbound every day, but you haven't said what about. Mira was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of tea, but she wasn't drinking, just holding it like an anchor. They've been helping me decide whether to tell you the truth, she said finally, about what I discovered, about why I left the Aurelion, about what the crown-shaped scar on my soul actually means. Both men went still. I found myself leaning forward, invisible and intent. I knew some of this, had pieced it together from observation and report. But even I didn't know the full story of what had driven a truth-seeker to abandon her divine purpose. You don't have to tell us if you're not ready, Edrin said, though the curiosity in his eyes was obvious. I know, Mira said, but I think I need to. Not just for you, but for myself. Because what I learned, it's the same thing you're learning here, the same truth the unbound discovered that got them imprisoned. And if I don't share it, I'm choosing comfort over honesty. I'm choosing to let you walk into danger without knowing what you're really facing. She took a shaking breath, set down her tea, looked at both of them with eyes that had seen too much. 3. The Aurelian, Mira began, present themselves as the guardians of cosmic order, the preservers of balance, and the ones who ensure souls pass through the well properly instead of being consumed or corrupted. Everything they do is framed as necessary for the greater good, for preventing the chaos and destruction the Varkhûl would unleash if given free rein. That's what I believed when I became a truth seeker. Our job was to root out corruption within the Aurelian ranks, to ensure that those given divine authority weren't abusing it, to be the conscience of the cosmic order itself. She laughed without humour. I took it seriously, too seriously as it turned out. What did you find? Marcus asked quietly. I found out where divine power actually comes from, Mira said. The Aurelian claim they're sustained by the well itself, that their authority flows from their stewardship of the cosmic cycle, that they're different from the Varkhûl because they don't consume souls, they preserve them. She met their eyes, her own haunted. It's a lie, all of it. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly. The Aurelian do consume souls, Mira continued. They're just more refined about it, more systematic. When a soul passes through the well, it's supposed to be cleansed of accumulated trauma and memory, then return to the cycle for reincarnation. But the cleansing process doesn't just purify the soul. It extracts power, divine essence, the very substance the Aurelian used to maintain their immortality and authority. So they're feeding on souls just like the Varkhûl, Edrin said slowly, just pretending they're not. Worse, Mira said. The Varkhûl are at least honest about what they do. They consume souls openly, make bargains, offer power in exchange for service. You know what you're getting into with them. But the Aurelian, they've built an entire cosmic order around the lie that they're altruistic, that they serve the greater good. that souls choosing to pass through the well are making a free choice for the benefit of all creation. But it's not a free choice if they don't know what they're actually agreeing to, Marcus said. Exactly. Mira's hands were shaking now, and when I found the records, the actual accounting of how much power was being extracted, how many souls were being diminished, not just purified, how the luminaries had known about this from the beginning, I made the mistake of asking questions. What happened? Edrin asked. They branded my soul, she said flatly, the crown-shaped scar. It's not just a mark of shame, it's a tracking mechanism. Every divine-touched entity can see it, can know I'm a traitor to the Aurelian cause. It makes me permanently visible to both sides of the cosmic war. I can never hide, never be truly safe. They did it to make an example of me, to show what happens when you question the established order. But they let you leave, Edrin said. Why not just kill you? Because I'm more useful alive, Mira said bitterly. A dead martyr inspires rebellion, a living traitor who everyone can see is marked and broken. That inspires fear, compliance. The understanding that questioning divine authority has permanent, inescapable consequences. She looked at them both, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. That's why I attach myself to you, Edrin. Not just because I wanted to help someone resisting divine manipulation, but because you're proof that their system isn't absolute, that mortals can carry divine power without being controlled by it, that there might actually be a way to break the cycle instead of just serving one side or the other. The third way, Edrin breathed. The third way, Mira confirmed, which is why the Aurelian will come for me eventually. They can't allow proof that their system can be rejected to exist. And they definitely can't allow someone with my knowledge teaching others how to see through their lies. I felt something cold settle in my chest, the organ I didn't technically possess but which ached nonetheless. She was right. Every word she'd spoken was true, and I'd known it, had always known it. But hearing it stated so plainly, seeing the pain it had caused this one mortal who dared to seek truth. I had been complicit in this for millennia. The quiet accord wasn't about balance. It was about maintaining the comfortable lie that allowed the Aurelian to keep feeding while pretending to serve. Thank you, Edrin said quietly, reaching across to take Mira's hand, for trusting us with this. For risking everything to teach me what you've learned. We won't let them take you, Marcus added, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Whatever comes, we protect each other. Mira smiled through her tears. That's what they're counting on, you know. That you'll care enough to fight for me. That they can use me as bait to force you into confrontation before you're ready. Then we'll make sure we're ready, Edrin said, together. The conversation turned to lighter matters after that, though the weight of Mira's revelation hung in the air like smoke. They spoke of small things, the quality of the evening meal, the strange acoustics of the fortress, Marcus's gradual recovery from the poison. But underneath it all, I could sense the shift. They were no longer three desperate people seeking refuge. They were becoming something else, something purposeful. The Unbound had given them tools. Now they needed to learn to use them. 4. The attack came on the fourth morning, just after dawn. I felt them coming before I saw them. A disturbance in the fabric of reality that marked the arrival of something that didn't belong in the mortal realm. Not Aurelion, not yet, but something worse in its own way, something more immediately dangerous. Varkhûl. They materialized in the courtyard like shadows given flesh, 12 of them, led by a creature I recognized from ancient reports. Zereth-Karl's lesser servant, a thing called the Fracture Walker. It moved with the jerky, unsettling gait of something that existed partially outside linear time, each movement both happening and about to happen and already complete. "The boy," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "Nethrix's investment. We've come to test the quality of the merchandise." Edrin stepped out of the building where he'd been sleeping, Sorrow's edge already in hand. But he moved differently now. There was no hesitation, no visible struggle with the blade. When he drew it, the red gem pulsed, not with hunger but with readiness, as if the sword and wielder had finally found a working arrangement. "I'm no one's investment," Edrin said calmly, "and this place is protected. The Unbound don't take kindly to uninvited guests." The Fracture Walker laughed, a sound that made reality shudder. "The Unbound are prisoners pretending to be free. They can't protect you, won't protect you. They're neutral. Remember, they chose no side." "You misunderstand neutrality," Kess's voice rang out. She emerged from the shadows, stone skin gleaming in the early light. Theron and Vel flanked her, and behind them came others of the Unbound. "We chose no side in your war, but that doesn't mean we don't defend our home, or those who seek refuge here." "Then you've chosen a side after all," the Fracture Walker hissed. "How disappointing." It moved, impossibly fast and somehow slow at the same time, and the 11 Varkhûl soldiers with it surged forward. Marcus was there instantly, grief's echo singing through the air. Mira's hands began to glow with defensive wards. The Unbound moved to intercept. But Edrin stood very still, and then something extraordinary happened. The 21 souls within him didn't scream, didn't fight for dominance, didn't fragment his consciousness with their competing demands. Instead, they synchronized. I felt it happen like a bell ringing in perfect harmony. Halvan Mar's awareness of fear and hesitation, Rorna's brutal understanding of violence, Orin Kuhl's tactical mind, the bandit's desperation-born creativity, the soldier's training, the harvester's alien perspective, the dreamwalker's grasp of consciousness manipulation, the commander's centuries of strategic experience, all of them present, all of them distinct, all of them offering their unique insight without demanding control, like a council of advisors rather than a mob of prisoners, like a symphony rather than cacophony. Edrin moved. It wasn't his movement alone. It was too fluid, too certain, too perfectly adapted to the Fracture Walker's temporal stuttering. He shadow-stepped, a technique he'd learned from the Dreamwalker, but with Rawn's brutal efficiency and the commander's strategic positioning. Sorrow's edge cut through reality itself, the time dilation effect controlled rather than wild. Guided by 21 souls working in concert, the Fracture Walker barely had time to look surprised before the blade took its arm. Black ichor sprayed and the creature howled in a frequency that shattered 3 of the courtyard's ancient stones. "Impossible," it gasped. "You're mortal, untrained. You shouldn't be able to track my movements." "I have an ancient harvester commander in my head," Edrin said calmly, "who's seen this trick 100 times, and a Dreamwalker who understands consciousness manipulation well enough to predict where you'll be before you decide to be there, and Halvan Mar, who's teaching me not to hesitate even when I'm afraid." He struck again, and this time the Fracture Walker managed to dodge, but directly into Marcus's blade. Grief's echo opened a wound that bled not blood, but crystallized sorrow, and the creature staggered. "Retreat!" it screamed at its soldiers. "Inform Nethrix, the weapon has matured beyond parameters. recalibrate the approach. But the Unbound had already closed the circle. Ch6's stone fists shattered 3 Varkhûl skulls. Theron's impossible eyes froze 2 more mid-motion, overwhelming their minds with visions they couldn't process. Vel moved like flowing water, drowning essence in something older than thought. Only the Fracture Walker escaped, using its temporal manipulation to tear a hole in reality and flee through it. The remaining Varkhûl soldiers fell, their essences dissipating without the anchor of soul weapons to contain them. Silence fell over the courtyard. Edrin stood in the centre, breathing hard but steady. Sorrow's edge hummed quietly in his hand, and for the first time since he'd first grasped it, the blade seemed content, not sated, not triumphant, just in harmony with its wielder. "You did it," Marcus said, awe in his voice. "The 21 souls? They worked together, voluntarily." Edrin nodded slowly, wonder dawning on his face. "They wanted to help. Once I stopped trying to control them, once I genuinely listened, they wanted to contribute, to be useful, to matter." He looked at his hand, at the sword it held. "They're not my weapons. They're my companions. All 21 of them." "The third way," Vel said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Not control or submission, not isolation or consumption, but genuine community, voluntary cooperation between distinct beings who choose to work together despite, or perhaps because of, their differences." "Is this sustainable?" Mira asked, ever the practical one. "Or was it just the heat of battle that brought them together?" Edrin was quiet for a moment, listening to voices only he could hear. "They're saying it depends on me, on whether I keep honouring them as individuals rather than just tools. They'll work with me as long as I work with them. The moment I try to dominate again, we'll fracture." "An ongoing negotiation," Ch6 said. "Not a permanent solution. That's the price of freedom. It requires constant choice, constant effort, constant vulnerability. Easier to submit to divine order or demonic hierarchy. Much harder to maintain genuine democracy of souls." "I'll do the work," Edrin said firmly. "They've earned that much, all of them." Theron nodded approvingly. "Then your training here is complete? You've learned what we can teach you? The rest is simply practice. Continuous, exhausting, worthwhile practice." "What about the Fracture Walker?" Marcus asked, ever tactical. "It escaped. It'll report to Nethrix. Tell him what happened here." "Good," Vel said with that ancient, terrible smile. "Let Nethrix know his weapon has developed consciousness. Let him understand that Edrin can't be controlled the way he planned. Fear is the beginning of respect, and the Varkhûl only respect what they fear." "But it also means we're running out of time," Mira said quietly. "The Fracture Walker was just a test. Now that they know what Edrin's become, both sides will move more aggressively. The Aurelian will see him as a threat to cosmic order. The Varkhûl will see him as an asset, gone rogue." She touched the crown-shaped scar only she could see. "And I'm the obvious lever to use against him." "V." They spent the next days preparing, though for what, none of them could quite articulate. Edrin practiced maintaining the harmony with his 21 souls. It wasn't easy. Some days they worked together seamlessly, a true community of distinct voices contributing to shared purpose. Other days, old tensions surfaced, Rauna's brutality clashing with Halvan Mar's reluctance, the Harvester's alien logic confusing the human souls, the Dreamwalker's manipulative instincts suggesting shortcuts Edrin refused to take. But even the difficult days were different from before. The souls no longer screamed. They argued, yes. They disagreed, certainly. but they did so as individuals with legitimate grievances and perspectives, not as a chaotic mob fighting for control. It's like a council meeting, Edrin tried to explain to Marcus one evening. Sometimes productive, sometimes frustrating, but always honest. They tell me what they think, I listen. We find compromises. Or sometimes I make the final call and they accept it because I've proven I respect them. Marcus worked on his own balance, learning to let his 43 sorrows take turns rather than drowning in their collective weight. Some days were harder than others. Some griefs were too heavy to set aside easily. But he was learning, growing, becoming more than just a vessel for other people's pain. I remembered something yesterday, he told Edrin, about who I was before grief's echo. Just a small thing. I used to carve wooden toys for children in my village. Horses, mostly. I'd forgotten that. Forgotten I was ever anything other than this. He smiled, and the expression looked strange on his face, as if his features had forgotten how. I think I'd like to do that again, someday, when all this is over. Just make something simple and good. Something that makes children smile. Mira spent her time with the Unbound, learning things she didn't share immediately, but I could see the changes in her, a quieter confidence, a steadier purpose. She'd lived for years with the burden of her secret, isolated by her crown-shaped scar. Here, among others who'd chosen to stand outside the cosmic war, she'd found something she'd thought lost forever. Community. The Unbound watched it all with the satisfaction of teachers seeing students surpass expectations. They offered guidance when asked, but never direction. They showed possibilities, but never insisted on specific paths. Everything they did reinforced the same lesson. There were as many ways as there were souls to walk them. And through it all I observed, learning alongside them, though they didn't know it, questioning certainties I'd held for millennia, watching the impossible become real through the simple power of treating each other with dignity. Bran's hammer was being reforged somewhere far from here. In 3 weeks, perhaps less, it would be complete. What happened then was unclear. Where they would go, what they would do, how they would use what they had learned. These were questions without answers yet. But they would face those questions together, not as master and servants, not as manipulator and manipulated, but as free souls who'd chosen to walk side by side, each distinct, each valued, each contributing to something larger than themselves. On the 7th evening, they gathered by the modified well one last time, not for training, simply to sit together in the space they'd transformed from prison to sanctuary. "Thank you," Edrin said to the Unbound, "for showing us what was possible, for teaching us to see the chains." "You did the work," Kes replied. "We only showed you the door. You chose to walk through it." "What will you do now?" Theron asked. "Both sides will be hunting you. The Aurelion because you threatened their order. The Varkhûl because you've slipped Nethrix's control. Neutrality won't protect you out there." "We'll figure it out," Edrin said. "Together, when the time comes." "The hammer will be ready soon," Marcus added. "That's our first marker. Until then, we practice. We prepare. We become strong enough to face whatever's coming." "And we stay alive," Mira said with a wry smile. "That seems important." Vel laughed. "That sound like breaking glass and spring rain." "Yes, staying alive is generally recommended when planning for the future." They sat together as the sun set, painting Korthak's throne in shades of amber and shadow. 3 broken people who'd found a way to help each other mend. 21 fragmented souls learning to be a community. 43 sorrows finding meaning beyond grief, and one divine observer beginning to question everything she'd ever believed about how the universe should work. The crucible had done its work. What emerged was something neither Aurelian nor Varkhûl had prepared for, something genuinely free. And in the days ahead, when divine forces came to force them back into the cosmic chess game, they would discover what free souls could accomplish when they chose to stand together. But that is a story for another chapter.
The story continues, as all stories must. Find the next chapter at Codex 11. Subscribe, lest the Forge's call go unheard. The Forge is patient, but it does not wait forever.